O'Reilly. You need parts? O'Reilly Auto Parts has parts. Need them fast? We've got fast. No matter what you need, we have thousands of professional parts people doing their part to make sure you have it. Product availability. Just one part that makes O'Reilly stand apart. The professional parts people.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry. With pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.
I guess I grew up on an older road.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 167 of the Hunting Collective. Phil, I've totally forgot the episode number. We had to start over. I apologize.
Yeah, I mean, that happens probably every other episode, so that's fine. I'm used to it.
We were just talking about this. Can I blame stuff on my kids, or is that me being a bad dad?
I think using your kids as an excuse to get out of something you don't want to do, I think that's fine. But like throwing them under the bus for your, stupidity or irresponsibility, I think that's kind of taking it too far.
Well, they keep me up a lot. I'm tired and I just forget things. And I can't blame it on them. I'm not going to blame it on them.
Good.
They're wonderful little humans. We're joined by the great and powerful Kayla Ray. Say, hey, Kayla.
Hey, the great and powerful. I appreciate that.
Yeah. At least like the melodic Kayla Ray. However... Yeah, hopefully. We know you will. So I got to tell you, it's been about 2 or 3 months that the song White Claw Wasted is stuck in my head. I was just singing it. I just walked into my studio here at my house and I was just going, and I wanna get why. Just my wife's like, what are you singing? I said, well, it's a long story. But I think a lot of listeners to this podcast love that song. So you got to tell us how you decided that was the thing to sing.
That's cool. I've had like a lot of an influx of your folks come in, which has been pretty cool because of that. But I played at a place. There's a little dive outside of Omaha, Nebraska called Bucks. Mm-hmm. It's in Venice, Nebraska. It's the only. Oh, yeah. I think it's like also the post office and maybe like the town hall of Venice, Nebraska too. But I played a gig and a dude drove a long way to come hang out for the weekend, and we all had a large time, but he had a larger time than most. And the end of the night, everybody's playing Black Hawk's greatest hits on the jukebox, and they're like, I love it, you get it, it's so great, And then this dude proceeded to fall asleep on the bar. And we gave him a hard time. But the best part about it is that he was drinking White Claw the whole evening. And so, we did all like the college age things to do. Like we wrote on his face and, he was pretty sick. Anyway, I was challenged to write a song about him being White Claw wasted, but I got to feeling kind of bad about it because we teased him pretty good. And he came a long way to come to the show. So I thought maybe I would just imply that men who are secure enough to drink White Claw are maybe a little like more heavily endowed than others. And so I really didn't. I love that y'all found that, because it's definitely a cell phone recording that we put on YouTube. You can hear my dog eating food in the background. It was not like a grown-up thing at all. It was perfect.
That's why it's perfect. And I love the backstories even makes it more perfect. Because I just started telling people that I like White Claw like 2 summers ago. I started, around a campfire in the backyard. I drank this thing. I thought, well, there's no way I can get drunk off this. So I'll have about 6 or 8 of them. And then next thing you know, I was like, wow, everything's feeling great. Everything's feeling good. Music sounds better. The world is clear. And since then, we've talked a lot about White Claw on this show. Phil thinks that natural lime is the best flavor. Bullshit. We all know that it's mango. We all know that it's mango.
But I've never had a White Claw. That's
good.
terrible.
That's good. No, that's not terrible. That's not terrible. But you appreciate a man like me who might drink a mango-flavored seltzer water drink.
Yeah, being secure enough to do that. Like my pride hurts so much I have to drink Jameson and water, because I got something to prove. So if you're confident enough to walk around with a White Claw, then more power to you.
That's one way to put it. Sure, Kayla, that's very kind of you.
That's a very kind way to put it. That's very kind. Yeah. The one time I actually went to the Jameson distillery one time in Dublin, and they were serving. I was shocked that they were serving cranberry Jamesons at their little bar. I thought, what self-respecting Irishman would walk in here? It must be for tourists. They must do that just for the tourists. I'm like, what self-respecting Irishman would walk in and have a Jameson and cranberry? That can't be a thing. There's no way that's
surely that's the washout process, right? Like that's how they pick off somebody that isn't a regular.
Yeah, they would slide that across the table, and if you put your hand towards it, they're like, "Oh, no. You're out. You're out. You're disqualified. You're disqualified." All right. Well, listen, we got to explain the artistic process, because what ended up, we called it a contest in the beginning to write our new theme song, but it became kind of like an art project in a way. We had people. I told everyone not to send me recordings of them singing their proposed lyrics, but people did anyway. So then I had to listen to these awful renditions of these wonderful poems and songs that people sent in. So I counted. We had 103 people submit things, which is almost as many. Kayla, you won't know this, but we had once had people draw Phil's face based only on his voice. That was a contest. Cool. Yeah, that was a contest. See his face? Yeah, he likes it. He's into it. We had like 300 of those that people actually sat down with their families to draw Phil's voice face. So we didn't quite get to 300, but in terms of like people writing poetry, we got a good track record around here, right, Phil?
Yeah. Too many people enter these contests. I've said it before.
Yeah, he thinks people are wasting their time, but they're not. I don't think they're wasting their time at all. Here's what I did. I read them all, and there were 3 or 4 of them that were my favorites, and I couldn't choose between just one of them. And even though that this might be something that offends the artistic sensibilities of our listeners, I kind of like Frankenstein some stuff to get to what I sent Kayla. Then this included lyrics from Brett Russell, Ryan Savley, and Costa Gus Fote, MD. I'm going to say if I'm saying that wrong, but Gus, who writes in all the time, who wrote
Dr.
basically the
Gus.
bones of this, Dr. Gus. Dr. Gus. And so that's how we got here. I took all these lyrics and I sent it to Kayla. And Kayla, when you first read this, you thought these guys are idiots or possibly geniuses, underappreciated in their time. What did you feel?
Absolutely that. They're either idiots or possibly, geniuses that are underappreciated in their time. That was exactly it. Yep.
Oh, that's good. Yeah. Well, we're driving. We're grooving. Right. All right. And so you spent some time over the weekend putting it to a melody. Did you not?
I did. I tried. I have to say though, I called my dad and then our buddy Josh Niemeyer, who's like an avid listener, because I desperately don't want to come on here and sound like a chump. So I had him like fact check me, on a couple rearrangements here. So, it was a collective effort. Yeah.
Well, that's good. It's good that you have somebody in our little cult here that can inform you what it's like to be around. All right. Well, do you want to give us any thoughts prior, or just play us a song? Because Phil, he's been texting me about this all weekend. He can barely contain himself to hear this.
Well,
is that right?
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I hit my data cap. I want to hear the song, but also, Ben, I kind of want to do a rewind after we hear the song and hear about Kayla's origins and stuff. I want to know her story. I don't know anything about Kayla Ray.
I like it mysterious. I think we should keep it. I mean, it's up to you, Phil. It's your show, but
that's true.
I feel like the story about White Claw Wasted is enough to keep me. All I need to do is now know like what the tour schedule is, and then that's all I need to know.
It's up to you. Well, let's hear the track. Let's hear it if Kayla's ready.
All right, we'll see. I'll try.
All right.
So there are lots of like in here, you know. So I replace the with the some pickup notes. So we'll see.
Okay, we're ready. This is like I've been in the industry for 10 years, and this is like the culmination of 10 years of work to get to this point. So no pressure.
No pressure, right? Thank you.
No pressure.
I appreciate that. Right, my palms aren't sweaty at all. All right. Clean your gun, turn your bow, we're the Hunting Collective Show. Calling hunters new and old, we're the Hunting Collective Show. Working pick and shovel or working pen in hand, we congregate now as lovers of the land. My plan with focus, we're just living for the search. Dreaming of a fire with a salty Gilbert. Ain't coming back until it's cold and late. Taking it slow so we can shoot straight. Clean your gun, turn your bow, we're the Hunting Collective Show. Calling hunters new and old, ain't no cold time told. When no one's too good and we're all good enough, we got filthy engineer calling any shooter's bluff. Hard times come calling and bitter vegans crying. Just remember there's always been old black. Ruled by reason is our collective fate. Taking it slow so we can shoot straight. Clean your gun, turn your bow, we're the Hunting Collective Show. Calling hunters new and old, ain't no cold time told. Where facts are facts and opinions are subjective. You're listening now to the Hunting Collective.
Oh, yeah. We did it, Phil. Are you clapping?
Oh, I'm clapping, yeah. Ben, I just like to point out that we didn't do anything. That was all Kayla Ray and our listeners. So that's too good for this show, right?
That is way too good. I was thinking that too. I'm like, this is too good for this show, and maybe we all get famous together. I mean, it could have happened, Kayla. Kayla, that was badass. That was badass.
It has
well
potential.
done.
You know, knock some dirt off of it. Yeah. That was fun.
Yeah.
I enjoyed doing that.
I'm glad I knew I wanted to give you no instruction just to kind of let you play it. Now, Phil thinks that's too long to play at the beginning of every show. I don't think it's too. I think people will listen to however long that is, Phil.
I was going to agree with you. I think that there are like some potential for like some little like like the out of time tagline or like just like a hook or something maybe. But what do I know? I don't know.
No, you know a lot. So we gotta workshop this, Phil. Here's my idea. I think we put some in the beginning of the show, some at the end, and then a little interstitial.
That's good. Yeah, we could do like the first verse in the beginning, and maybe the second for the outro or something. Yeah, we'll work on it. We've got plenty of options.
Caleb, I just want to. This badass is the only thing I was thinking as I was dancing and clapping. I was thinking this is the most badass thing that ever happened to me. I've done some particularly badass things. So thank you.
Yeah.
And please tell people where they can find your music or where they can see you. I know you said you were like back to touring live when the world, I guess now, and then also when the world gets back to normal. But tell people where they can. They've already found you by searching White Claw Wasted, I think, probably on YouTube. But where else can they find you?
Yeah, my YouTube presence, it sucks. I really got to work on that. This was a good awareness of that. But KaylaRayMusic.com is the website, and that's where most of the touring stuff is, and Facebook and Instagram and all that. But it's all under Kayla Ray Music, Apple Music, Amazon, yada yada. Yeah,
all of it. Phil, I think we'll close out. You can ask a few origin story questions since you're so interested. I don't want to leave that off the table.
Oh no, I'm just curious because you're talking about touring. Clearly, you've been doing this for a while. When did you get started? How did you get started?
I've been at it about 10 years, like as a grown up, you know. I really dig it. I grew up in Waco, Texas, and I got a gig pretty early on. I was already playing and writing and stuff, but tour managing for a guy named Jason Eady. So I was sloughing deer and running around and just learning, really. I mean, I didn't know at all what I was doing. He just really threw me a bone. But he produced my first 2 records, and I've just been at it ever since. I dig it. I wouldn't trade it. It's crazy, but I wouldn't trade it.
Great. Yeah, that's awesome.
When you get back to my kids, when I think of like what I want them to be, I was like, man, a musician, as crazy as it would be, as hard as it is to succeed as a musician, it's just, I'm gonna suggest for both of them, like, try to find a way to get your art out in that, you know, in that setting, because man, it's great.
Tell them to stay in school and like do everything but that. Like, this shit is crazy. Oh, I shouldn't have said that word. Sorry. It's crazy.
No, that's okay.
I don't know. Like, guard your credit score. Don't be ridiculous. Be a grown up. Like, all the things. If they were my children, I would tell them the opposite. But I appreciate you saying that.
Do your taxes.
Yeah.
No, I'm with you. I feel you. Well, Kayla, we appreciate it. This is a life changer for us. I'll have Phil connect with you and get all the particulars on the music. And if you don't mind, we'll use that every time we post a show from now till they cancel us.
Yeah, thank you for that. I'll record a version of it that doesn't have a bunch of blips in it. But I appreciate y'all a lot. This is fun.
No, this is so good. I appreciate. I had at least 3 or 4 listeners email me the link to White Claw Wasted. I'm glad they did, and glad we can connect with you. And we'll have to have you back on, or me and Phil have to come to one of your live shows if you're ever close around Montana.
For sure.
Hey, I would love to do that. I get up to Bozeman pretty often. I used to. So I'll let you know. That would be killer.
You let us know. All right, Kayla. Yeah, appreciate
awesome.
it.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you.
Philip T. Engineer. That was awesome, dude. I keep saying awesome and badass. I can't really articulate how excited I am.
Stupendous.
Yeah, stupid. I just don't. I felt like I was even bumbling over my words with Kayla because I was a little bit starstruck by her awesomeness.
Yeah, it's I gotta say, it's very cool of her to agree to do this. And I was telling you when we were off mic that it was the right call to follow up with her after we heard that White Claw song.
Well, that White Claw song has been embedded in my psyche for about 3 months. Every time I pop open a White Claw, I'm like, I sing a little bit of it. But yeah, I was a little verklempt. I was so excited to hear that song and talk to Kayla. Apologies. I felt.
Yeah, I gotta say, I also did not expect such a great origin story for the song too. I thought it was. Yeah.
No, that's. I mean, the whole thing, man. The whole thing is exciting. Well, again, thank you to Kayla Ray. Go check her out, man. Follow her. She's done something for our show that she didn't have to do, and I am a little bit taken aback by how great that song was, and I can't wait to force you guys to listen to it before you get to the podcast forever and ever and ever. But you know, we've got a lot to get to, but I will say, of all of you that wrote in, thank you for writing in. The poetry and lyrical abilities of our listeners are, I would say, unmatched in the hunting podcast space. I feel like our listeners are the best lyrical artists of any of the many thousands of podcasts in our category. So thank you for that. Specifically, thanks to Dr. Gus, Ryan, everybody that I'll be sending you guys an email specifically, but we'll be calling you out in every episode to thank you for that song, and also thank Kayla Ray for putting it to music. So another wonderful, beautiful chapter of THC has come to a close. Now we have a theme song. Let's say it this way, Phil. I think we're the first Meat Eater Network podcast to have its own theme song. Can we say that?
Is true. That true? That's a fact. You can say that.
Many will copy us after this, but none will be able. Specifically, I think Bent will copy us after this. But none of the other podcasts are as cool as us. I think this cements it. If you didn't already know, we are the best. So we got some stuff to get to. Today's podcast, if we didn't fill you in at the end of last week's show well enough, is a little bit of a response to, I mean, I want to say response because it's been a while, but a continuation of the conversation and a little more clarification of the conversation around animal rights and the conversation we had with Paul Bashir. So if you haven't listened to that Paul Bashir episode, head back and do that now. And we're back. Thank you for spending that time doing that. And we're going to go through a little bit of what happened in that conversation and explore a little bit more about animal rights, animal welfare, all those things in this episode with our favorite non-Beatle, Paul McCarney. Paul McCarney, Phil.
Yes, he's one letter away from being one of the most prolific songwriters of our generation.
And what I didn't know that Phil was telling me about before this, and I found this out as I was Googling Paul McCarney to read his articles, is that Paul McCartney is a avid vegan and anti-hunter.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, you would assume, because he's such an outspoken vegan, he's probably an anti-hunter. I don't know about the anti-hunting thing, though. I just know that he does not eat meat and is very, he likes to tell people about it.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a rumor, I think this is true, you could fact check me, Weird Al Yankovic wanted to do a parody of Live and Let Die, the Paul McCartney James Bond song, and call it Chicken Pot Pie. And Paul McCartney did not give him permission because he did not want to have a song about meat consumption, even though it was a complete parody. And I don't know if it was actually endorsing eating chicken pot pie, but I can tell you that I endorse it, if that means anything.
Yeah. How about wild turkey pot pie once we get this going? But so you're saying that Paul McCartney is a rabid anti-hunter, calling him out. Rabid anti-hunter. Famous Beatle.
Did not say that, but
living legend.
Possibly.
Well, if he's listening to this, you're welcome on the show. We'll give you the Paul Bashir treatment.
Yes, please. Please, Paul McCartney, if you're listening, I'd love to have a chat. Big fan. I've seen him in concert multiple times.
Have you?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that. I could have guessed. Video games, Beatles. It's all coming together.
Sure.
Yeah, it all tracks. Hey, Phil, you know, last week you made a mistake, a big mistake. And,
no.
Yeah, I know you did. Yeah. You said that you were making... You said sarcastically, I think. I think it was sarcastically. I'm not sure. That you were making membership cards to the THC cult.
I said that. It was sarcastic. I apologize.
But you
did not pick up on that.
You did receive several notes from people asking you here's my address. Please get the card in the mail. I'd like it to be laminated.
This is true.
And did you reply to those people?
No,
you ignored them.
I forwarded them on to you.
I'm not gonna reply to your emails, Phil.
Oh. I mean, listen, I was mostly offended that this person somehow found my email. I mean, it's not like it's that hard to figure out. I'm not going to say it on the air right now, but I was mostly just...
Oh, buddy, now you're opening it up wide
I was
open.
mostly just caught off guard, being like, who is this schmuck, and how did he find out my email address?
People are right now thinking in their minds, what is Phil's email? And how could I figure it out? I'm not going to help them because I could get in trouble, but... I know you're thinking about it now, and you're thinking about sending him an email. And I'm not going to dissuade you from thinking about it. Actually doing it, that's up to you.
Let me just say that sending me an email will not get you a THC membership card.
So you're not making, just as like a public service announcement, you're not making THC membership cards at all.
No, unless you allow me to design them in any way I want. You get no notes.
No feedback?
No feedback. And then I can send them out to whomever I want.
All right, we can do it. It's fine. I'm so desperate to be liked.
Yes.
All right, well, we're going to get into the animal rights, the animal welfare, but the other mistake we made last week is we mentioned that our Blue Ridge contingent, that's all going to take out our new hunter, could be the first regional chapter. And so lots of people wrote in that they want to also take part in regional chapters in their neck of the woods. Specifically Ben, our buddy, we'll just say his full name, Ben Upton, who's written in before. He said, when you and Phil were talking about it, you somewhat jokingly mentioned there would be a regional chapters of the cult. And even though you weren't necessarily serious, I think that this could be kind of cool. I moved to Denver in September, and since moving, I've had a really, really, really hard time meeting anyone to hunt because of COVID. In fact, the only new person I met to hunt was Hayes Heil, who I found through the podcast, if you'll remember, back in November. I am so passionate about hunting, and I'm the type of hunter that wants to work hard, hike far, and really get a good suffer in before it's all said and done. He likes to hunt turkeys, elk, mule deer, grouse, but the idea of going into these places alone is a bit intimidating, so it's been pretty frustrating to not have met anyone that wants to go do these things with me, especially because I know there are plenty of folks that like those things around here. I think that having some way for cult members to reach out and find each other will be a really cool way for people to find hunting partners in the times of COVID, even if it's a forum or a Facebook page or something like that. I'm fairly confident that most of the people that listen to your podcast, especially the ones that would email, honestly would be interested in regional chapters. And I got pretty excited myself as the possibility of having a way to meet like-minded people to hunt with out there. Okay, Phil, what do we do? Do you have the time to manage this program?
If I do not have the time to make 10,000 laminated membership cards, I don't think I have the time to to somehow oversee this expansion of the THC cult. But I think that's why we have Barry Gilbert on the board, right? Or not Barry Gilbert, excuse me, Eric Hall. Apologies to Eric Hall.
Wow. You may want to cut that. Eric Hall may never listen again. Yeah, we may have to approach Eric Hall about this, see if he's got any extra time on his hands. Sure. I got to tell you guys, I got absolutely no extra time on my hands to run something like this. But what I will do for all of you out there, just very quickly, is if you email me and you're in the situation where you'd like to meet new hunters, we will read you. We'll do a little segment on the show, and we'll read your name and where you live, and we'll ask people to email in, and I'll make sure I connect you. This is in the short term to solve the problem of the THC cult. I don't want people to think that I don't care. I certainly do care, but it's cool to see it go this way, and we want to help guys like Ben and our emergent hunter from a couple of weeks ago find people that go hunting in the field just like we do. So if you're desperate out there and you need a little help, email us, and we will help. Of that, I can promise you. I think we've got in our Blue Ridge chapter, Phil, our inaugural Blue Ridge chapter of the THC cult, at least at this point, 15 people in that little bucket. So I'm excited about that. And also excited to talk to Paul McCarney. Again, the most unfortunate name in Googling history. Paul McCarney, who is out of Newfoundland. He's a PhD up there and done a lot of conservation work and writes very beautifully about the issues in the hunting space. So I wanted to have him on to talk about a specific article he wrote. That's the point of the conversation with Paul McCarney. Appreciating nuance. That's what hooked me. The title, the sub is appreciating nuance, and I'm like, I'm done. I got to read it now. The difference between animal rights and animal welfare. Now, this goes back to our conversation with Paul Bashir, but it's interesting to think of hunters possibly as animal welfarists rather than the opposition as animal rights folks. And so in this article, Paul sets it up this way. He quotes David Peterson from Heart's Blood, a wonderful book if you haven't read it. Animal welfare, quote, supports the humane treatment and responsible care of animals that ensures comfort and freedom from unnecessary pain and suffering. By contrast, the animal rights movement dictates that the use of animals by any human for any purpose is wrong. So as we go through this conversation with Paul McCarney, you'll want to key in on that. We get to that down the road in the conversation. But that's really kind of the point that I wanted to get to as we move away from the Paul Bashir conversation last year and start to think about this critically. The other point from that Paul Bashir episode that came up was large-scale agriculture, plant-based agriculture, and how much death can be applied to that actual activity. Now, that is a hard thing to pin down on a large scale, on a macro scale. It might be easier on a micro scale. Certainly, when you're talking about just tangential or empirical evidence, we can find a lot. I've seen a lot of vultures hovering over combines and harvesters across the Midwest in my travels. So we can put some empirical evidence around the fact that large-scale agriculture, the plant variety, kills a lot of things. They're just not the things we're used to seeing die. So, but we've had, what really kicked all of this off for me was a fellow named Jack Henry reached out to me online, and he is a biological science student at California Polytech San Luis Obispo. So a California biology student, and he does some of this work for a living. He recently graduated. He says this summer and into December that he worked at a biological consulting firm in Bakersfield, California, which performed biota surveys, pre-construction surveys on some of these large-scale farms. And although he said he's by no means an expert, he said it gave me a solid understanding of the mortality that results from construction and agricultural efforts. Eventually, I quit this job due to some ethical concerns of the biological consulting industry, in which we were encouraged to break the law to make developers happy during monitoring of endangered/threatened species. That's not good. But then he goes on to explain what he learned there. He says, whenever you have a plot of land, almost anywhere you can think of, there is a sensitive microclimate of animals living underground. I'll try to simplify some of these animals to specific population densities to individual acres. Voles, moles, gophers, kangaroo rats, mice, rats, fence lizards, snakes, and much more may lay underground at any point. For example, 1 acre of land may contain up to 8 to 20 individual pocket gophers. A typical meadow vole populations are regularly between 15 to 45 per acre in old field habitat. Deer mice population densities regularly occur up to 15 mice per acre. And according to the Fish and Wildlife Service, the agency responsible for listing threatened and endangered species estimates kangaroo rat densities in some grasslands from 2.5 to 2.75 individuals per acre. Reptiles, on the other hand, might even be harder to quantify because their metabolic needs and the detection probability involved with detecting accurate densities are more rare. It's really, really hard, he says, to visualize these densities because so many of these species are nocturnal. Unfortunately, people care much less about these individuals since they are not charismatic megafauna that opponents of a carnivore diet care about. It's much easier for people to care about large animals like elk or deer. Prior to construction of a building or conversion of a lot to agriculture, a field will be disked. During disking, animals in a given area do not flee usually. Generally, the noise of a tractor performing the disking will drive rodents back into their burrows where they will be inevitably killed. The aforementioned animals will be deleted from the landscape either by the blunt force that occurs by suffocation in collapsed burrows. It doesn't take a mathematician to quantify the deaths per acre of individual animals into the hundreds or thousands. Of course, that brings us to the ethical considerations of whether or not large, charismatic animals are worth more in the eyes of vegetarians or vegans than the sheer number of small animals slaughtered, many of which may be classified as protected by the Fish and Wildlife Service. There is also a dangerous chain of events that occurs when all life is simply deleted from the landscape. For example, many eagles, hawks, falcons, coyotes, foxes, weasels that relied on this source of food have now lost an important part of their diet and are now displaced. Some raptors may make do and predate on the land, but most will never be the same. He goes on to say, I think it's important to come to terms with mortality involved with development, agriculture, and even livestock because, of course, livestock feed requires agriculture. In my position, it's hard to come to any conclusion other than that hunting being the most ethical choice people may make to do the calorie content equivalent per individual. Although I haven't had the chance to hunt during the corona pandemic, your podcast has encouraged me, for my close friends, to get our hunter education classes done and get our hunting licenses, which we all have now. Unfortunately, it's really hard to scale up hunting as a feasible way for the majority of American to get fed, but it's important to understand the course of agriculture and livestock. At the same time, it casts a great shadow of doubt over the ethics of veganism versus the ethics of eating meat. I know that was very long, but thank you, Jack Henry, for that. What Jack is sharing, really, it has some concretion to it, has some data and really also personal experience as to how much death goes into large-scale agriculture. And that was really the crux of the situation with Paul Bashir. The other crux of it is what we just talked about, animal rights and animal welfare. So we're going to get you in to this conversation with Paul McCarney right now. Enjoy.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there because they're great and they're super friendly and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
Paul, how are you, sir?
Doing very well. How are you?
Good. I cannot complain. I wanted to first address something with you that we hadn't talked about previously. When I try to Google your name, Google really wants me to watch Paul McCartney videos and listen to Beatles
man,
songs.
I could do anything I want, and I'm anonymous on the internet.
Yeah, there's no way to find you. I put like Paul McCartney hunting and conservation, and it was like, did you mean Paul McCartney?
Well, and what's great about that is the kind of stuff that comes up. You're like, oh, hell no. No, I didn't mean that, because we do not share, Paul McCartney and I do not share similar perspectives on hunting. And especially it's sort of funny because I studied seals for my PhD and spent a lot of time in the North studying and, eating and hunting seals. So it was a good icebreaker when I would get to communities and introduce myself and kind of go, no, not that one.
Not that one. He'd be here for a different reason.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you put in Paul McCartney hunting, it comes up with all of the anti-hunting quotes from Paul McCartney.
Until I'm knighted, I won't be able to compete.
Yeah, until then you're just kind of in a weird internet search paradox, which actually probably benefits you, as you mentioned there.
It's good. I actually don't mind being a little bit.
Well, tell people a little bit about your background. I already learned something I didn't know about your PhD work with seals and seal hunting. But give people a little bit of the background, where you grew up, how you got into this, and how you got into more of the scholarly work and writing and things that you do right now.
Yeah, so cut me off when I'm going on too long here.
Let me just tell you, that was like an 8-part question.
Yeah.
Just start at the beginning. We'll work from there.
So I grew up in Ontario, just outside Toronto. So suburbia. And I'll kind of drop this as a bit of a maybe Easter egg for the later conversation, but definitely I did not grow up in a hunting household. No one I knew hunted except for one person at school, and had no exposure to it. I mean, spent a lot of time outdoors, and got into backcountry canoe tripping and hiking and things like that, but never with a gun in my hand. And sort of came to, as I was going through university, came to studying and being very really directly involved in a lot of environmental movements and environmental issues. So things around resource extraction and major hydroelectric dams and sort of movements and issues like that. And sort of started studying ecology and wildlife science and biology. And that's what really brought me around to the hunting world. I mean, I had fished growing up, but never put it together as a type of activity that was part of consumption and kind of hunting and angling. It was just a kind of going fishing sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So as I started to I really kind of came to hunting and sort of through a lot of the academic and post-secondary work I was doing, and had a couple of really great mentors at university who hunted and sort of brought me into it that way, and from the sense of really wanting to get a more personal understanding and connection with some of the stuff I was studying, and connect to it on a different level. When I say connect to it, I mean ecology and natural processes and wildlife and things. So that was what really was really what brought me to it. Is it started out as a way to kind of put into practice for myself personally what had really solidified as a moral and ethical and kind of academic passion. So then that led me to a PhD on and I worked with a really great guy at York University who studies polar bears and seals. And so that was sort of a perfect world for me to be in, because hunting and fishing and biology in that sense were inseparable. They were all part of it together. So I was really drawn to that.
Yeah. I mean, I think of your writing, what brought me to wanting to chat with you was some of the writings of yours that I've read. You don't necessarily remember where I was keyed onto it, but I was, and I started reading it, and you could just tell I love to just explore different people's perspectives and approaches and connections with hunting. And I could tell yours was, at least maybe had its origins in academia, and it kind of kind of splintered out into different subject matter and different ways to approach things. But, a lot of these tough topics we get into are a lot easier to understand when they're taken, from an academic perspective, or broken down using no dogma, no emotion, just trying to get to the heart of the matter. So I did appreciate, I think, that last point, like getting to the heart of the matter. I think some of the tough topics that we've really delved into on this show, your writing kind of gets to the heart of them in a really pragmatic way. So I give you that, I guess that to butter you up right out of the gate, man.
Well, thank you. And I mean, I appreciate that, because I think I'm drawn to writing much more around, I absolutely am fascinated by the scientific topics and the academic kind of digging and around these things, but putting it into when we were talking about this earlier, putting it into a way that is written for more kind of popular consumption and discussion is what really interests me. And that's, we were talking about Valerius Geis, who took his science writing and kind of deliberately tried to force himself to write for a more popular audience. And I think did it with absolute success. So it's people like that really kind of, I go, there is a way to do this. There is a way to like take a real academic obsession, but make it hopefully something that is useful in a non-academic world. I
mean, and conservation really embodies that in a lot of ways, right? I mean, I was reading an article that I just pulled up that I had read and you led me back to, it's called "The Companies We Keep: Politics and Inclusion in Hunting." And I know or at least aware of Lydia and Jimmy from Hunters of Color. We had them on last week and went through what they do and what they believe is kind of like the pathway to real and lasting diversity. And you touched on that in this article a little bit, but I think it's also a crossroads of what you just mentioned, where we're able to then take a look at hunting, and I'll just read you a little bit of what you wrote back in September. Hunting is wonderfully complex. It is a social activity that brings us together with friends and family. Hunting is also deeply embedded in conservation politics. I think that point right there is kind of how that academia and even the social aspects of hunting, kind of conservation needs all that stuff to work, right? I mean, it really needs each approach, and it needs to, I think, where you come in, like a good understanding of the two things, of how the scientific and academic studies work and how that relates to the more social and even political side of things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And, that piece was something that the idea had been sort of just sitting in my head since I started hunting, but I did not think of it as a topic deliberately to write about. Because I mentioned I kind of came to hunting through some of my own, being involved in environmental movements and things. And before that, I grew up listening, in the Toronto punk rock scene, and that scene is completely embedded in movements around social justice. So that was where I kind of came from, was that world. So when I came to hunting, it was really about those two worlds around social justice and political justice and environmental justice, and then bringing it into hunting was sort of a seamless transition for me. And they've always been together in my head. But I hadn't sort of found a way to express them that way. And one of the ways that I started to think about was in the same way that I think about companies and purchases that I make in my everyday life, which is, what are the companies that I'm wearing and purchasing and supporting? What are the values that they promote, and what are they doing to make the hunting world better, more just? And so I came to, and I didn't really think that there were a lot, to be honest. And I came to find companies like Hunt to Eat, for example, who, in my mind, are sort of forging the way in that way, and having these discussions and really meaningfully and directly saying, hunting is part of all these other discussions. It's embedded in these, and vice versa. And we need to explore them, and we need to have those conversations and do what we can. And so, that was where that one came from, was I sort of found a company then that I thought, well, they are doing that. So yeah. I mean, I think you're right in here. We are active on important conservation issues while allowing passivity around social issues, right? We are passive in the social sense and active in the conservation sense, but again, they're connected. And I said last episode that when it comes to, most people hear the word social justice these days and they go running for the hills, or they have a baked in thought that, sometimes it becomes this, very imperiled way of seeing the world. But I don't necessarily look at it that way. I think it's pretty simple. That what you said is true, that the way we socially relate to hunting, our society, and both how we relate to each other, can be improved and can be communicated in the same way as we relate to ecosystems and habitats and managed wildlife. So those things have to be connected, right? I mean, you feel like they're, where I came from was different than you. Those things were never connected until I actively connected them myself. And I think a lot of people are hungry to just explore that where it hasn't been explored in the past. Yeah, I think so too. And I think in a lot of cases, what it is also is it's sort of pulling the covers back on some of the narratives that were that are popular in the hunting and conservation world, and seeing that there are historical corners of this narrative and this history of hunting in which these things have always existed, where I think I talk about in that one that we likely wouldn't have the waterfowl populations we do today without women activists at that time. Yeah. We wouldn't have, I mean, people can sort of disagree on the political movements that are going on, but we wouldn't know and think the way we do in a lot of cases about certain environmental and conservation issues and things without many indigenous leaders and thinkers throughout history. And so I think that these things have been there, but they kind of get missed. And in some cases they get deliberately missed. But but yeah, no, I agree. People kind of go running for the hills, and that's something that that I also try to kind of confront and challenge is the kind of the cliches and stereotypes within the hunting community that I think we do more damage to ourselves with than anti-hunters could ever do to us. Where we divide and we categorize and we compartmentalize our lives and our thinking, and we kind of create more division within.
I say that all the time, and when I get into conversation with people about anti-hunting, and we're gonna break into a conversation here. We're gonna go as deep as we possibly can go on animal rights and here in a minute. But part of what people often say to me is that it's this anti-hunter you must defend yourself against. It's this like you need to build a partition between you and them. And I often say I get less divisive commentary from anti-hunters than I do from hunters.
Absolutely.
It's like 99-1.
Yeah.
If I'm being honest.
Oh yeah, absolutely, man. I get called all kinds of things about being a lefty and a social justice warrior and all of that stuff. And it's people, it's from within the hunting community. And I say, like, you're accusing me of being willing to think about these things and being willing to dig into them. And I mean, guilty then, Yeah,
me too. That's a good way to put it. I think a lot of people listening hopefully can agree that, like, if willingness to look at these things objectively and then also look at them personally too, be like, what do I believe? Well, but what do I think objectively is good for the community? I think that those two things are integral, and to not be too overt about this. You have some examples in this article about companies and how they express their value systems, right? So if you were to take justice, environmental justice, social justice, the hunting community does this and signals this in many ways. You give examples of, for example, Kuyu, right? Mm-hmm. They put sheep back on the mountain. And do you think when they put sheep back on the mountain, they don't talk about that as like a part of the shared set of values that we have in the hunting community? First Light talks about sporting heritage. They talk about public lands. They talk about they have a women's line. All of these companies, Sitka, they do the same thing. They have a grant system for the outdoors where they talk about funding really important habitat work and ecosystem work and things of that nature. And so all these companies are taking part in some sort of value-based activity that we can all agree on. And then,
and that's exactly it. And I think that's where I kind of then go, okay, now what's the next step? I saw as an example, when Sitka came out last year and said, that they do not support, opening out the Arctic National Wildlife Refuge to drilling. It was like they're kind of that was an environmental issue for sure, but they knew full well that they were going to be taking a lot of political heat from that.
Yep.
And I kind of mentioned it in there as well that in June, when the continent really started to talk in a very in a really real way about racial justice, and I sort of looked to the hunting community and saw, like, where do I see this leadership? And I didn't own anything by Hunt to Eat before then. And I bought a T-shirt that day when I saw them come out and say, we're doing better. We're going to do better for this. Yeah. And so, exactly. I kind of look to our community to say, how are we going to infuse the things that we already know how to do, because we've been doing them for so long around wildlife and conservation. How are we going to do those socially as well?
Yeah, and like I said, it's like the well has been poisoned by our politics. But if you just say, look at the way that people on social media, as hunters, as influencers, and companies that are influential, like leading members of our community, speak about conservation and how to work in it and live the life of it, and to add to the experience of hunting through, making sure there's healthy wildlife. I think it's as simple as saying we want to make a diverse, we want to make this a diverse community that is inclusive and welcoming and understands that it needs that to thrive, because hunting as I'm sure you probably agree, needs social acceptance to thrive. You know,
Yeah.
it just has to have
exactly.
that.
Yeah.
You know, and social acceptance requires acceptance from lots of perspectives, communities, and races and creeds. So to me, it's just like an objective thing. But I know you're just like me. When I try to just make it objective, it becomes it kind of gets a little bit decoupled from that when you get when you put it out.
and it is objective. But I also think like nothing could be more personal either than hunting. And I think this is why when I came to hunting as in my 20s, it just consumed me, because to me, there's no other part of my life that so fully exists in the most personal way, and also in the most intellectual, kind of objective, academic way. And that space right there is what I find so compelling and consuming about it, because you're right. It's like, it just seems so self-evident what we need to do. And at the same time, there's nothing more personal that we could do than take this activity that is so meaningful to us and kind of be critically reflective about it, you know?
Yeah. And I think, fortunately, because before the Black Lives Matter riots really last summer kind of got fired up, the previous November, we had done a podcast on the subject of diversity in hunting and how to really look at it critically. And I got a lot of pushback, more than I expected, and a more just veracity. Like the people that didn't like it just couldn't understand why I would even entertain such an idea. And then as time went on, even just, last week's episode with Lydia and Jimmy from Hunters of Color, it was almost like a non-issue. It was almost like everyone that didn't run for the hills back then that hung on sees this just as something we talk about. It's not something, there are little intricacies that people disagreed with in a very constructive way, but there wasn't any inflammatory hate speech around, what we talked about. And so that's movement, man. We'll get movement on this. But it's just, keep talking about it. And, it's from you to be, growing up in a different country, in a different, pretty far away from where I grew up, to come to that same kind of idea, I think is in and of itself kind of a analogy for where we got to do for the rest of the
totally. And these connections, I mean, I've chatted with Jimmy since they first launched Hunters of Color, and it's like, I didn't even know where he lived at the time. And then you find out that people are now connected on this. Their platform has connected people across the entire continent around this. And you realize this is a topic that is not as loud as others, but it's not niche. It's not sort of tucked away in the corner somewhere. And I think like what I try to get across to other hunters I talk to, and when I try to kind of get across in writing, is these things are tough, they're complicated, they're frightening, and that is something. Those are things, and those are feelings, and those are challenges that the hunting community and hunters and conservationists have dealt with since the beginning. No success that we've achieved has not been heretical at the time. I mean, do you take these big stories that, and you think when people wanted to stop market hunting in the early 1900s, that was a popular opinion among hunters? So it doesn't at all concern me. It concerns me greatly that we have people as part of a community that I'm part of that don't feel that everyone belongs here. That concerns me greatly, but it doesn't deter me, because I think that we just know that we're onto something, Yeah.
Well, and it's funny how this works too, because you go back to like 1936 when they had the first ever National Wildlife Conference. When you start looking at who was there, who was really the gathering around conservation, there was garden clubs. There was a much more, I guess you could say diverse, but a much more varied stakeholder group back then, it seems. Yeah. And maybe it's just how politics and our society and sociology has moved, but it just kind of seemed back then that there was John Muir hanging out with Teddy Roosevelt. Like that did happen. And even back then was very publicized. So,
well, yeah. And I mean, this is, I think, Ralph Waldo Emerson was eventually spoke out against hunting. And we see him as one of the great naturalists, right? We see, Henry David Thoreau, rather. And, we see Walden as one of the greatest environmental texts, and that taught us so much about how to think about living with nature. And in that book, he speaks out against eating meat. And it doesn't seem to take away from what we've learned from him in terms of relating to the environment and being stewards of the land. Because he didn't do it in a way that was meant to polarize. He didn't talk about it. He didn't demonize and villainize people. It was still towards the same goal, the same kind of thing that we all agreed on. And so I think that's instructive just in how, how we interpret things now, and how we don't see things, or how we do see things from the past. And when we kind of question that, we realize there are some lessons there, and how we maybe should be doing things differently.
Yeah. I'm telling you, I look back at that, FDR and that wildlife conference back in 1936. I've studied that and kind of read some of the reports that came out of that, and you get this idea, and maybe it's idealistic. Maybe if I was there, I wouldn't feel this way. But when I look back at that, 2,000 conservationists, there was farmers, hunters, anglers, like I said, garden club members, outdoor enthusiasts. There was a General Wildlife Federation idea, and also a group called the General Wildlife Federation, which changed 2 years later to the National Wildlife Federation. That really felt like that, because there was so much of a threat out there, such of a general threat to wildlife and wild lands, and just kind of our ability to go there, that we could gather around that. So I think we're there now too. I mean, we're there now too, I think. If we just look hard and dig into it. But yeah, I appreciate where you are on that. I really do.
Yeah, thanks. I'm glad. It's cool that you had them on. That's great.
Yep. Like I said, like I said, the first time we really broached this subject, and I'm not naive. I understand that there's a wide swath of America that's tired of hearing about it and wants to just talk about turkeys. I'm with them too. I would love to just talk about turkeys, but I have a disposition that doesn't allow for that, I don't think.
Yeah.
But that for us, like I said, for us to be able to push that forward and simplify it on a broad level and personalize it on like a micro level, I think is just the way. And for people to be asking, we had some good emailers from kudos to these folks that emailed last week about that episode, and it felt like they were nitpicking some of the points made, and I was so happy to see people nitpicking some of the solutions for the problem rather than the problem.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good way to put it, for sure. And I think, it won't surprise you that I found your discussion with Paul Bashir really interesting for that, because of that, I found there was a different focus sometimes from his perspective on the problem versus the nitpicking of the ideas and what he chose to focus on. Right. So I'm glad you listened to that. I can't listen back to it. I don't have. It's like those things become just forget. One of the reasons we'll start at the beginning here. One of the reasons I wanted to have Paul on was Paul McCarney, who we're talking to, not Paul Bashir. Wholly different reasons. Not Paul McCartney. Yeah, and not Paul McCartney, because he would probably have to come with Paul Bashir. They'd have to come on together. As you wrote a piece called "The Difference Between Animal Rights and Animal Welfare," around appreciating the nuance between and the history of animal rights. And I'm sure I'd love to get, after you listen to that, it's been a while since I talked to Paul Bashir, and it's been a while since I really kind of went back to that episode, but we did also have a listener of our podcast send us a bunch of answers here recently about large scale ag and how many animals they'll kill. And we've talked about that already in this episode, but we're getting, this is kind of a good time to take a reset and respond to that, because there's so much that happened that I laugh now because it just fired a lot of people up. But you listen to that. What did you take from that conversation? Man, I took so much from it. I specifically focused on the concept of appreciating nuance. And I very deliberately, when I wrote that piece about animal rights and welfare, I very deliberately did not position it as animal rights versus animal welfare. Because I did I don't see them as I see them as a contrast and as having specific nuance differences. And one of the things I took from that conversation is the importance of language, and exactly what I was sort of trying to highlight in my pieces around. And what I took from that was, and how language can be used, and in some cases misused, to in presenting a perspective that that kind of mobilizes certain, what's called in the literature, what's called moral framings. So, packaging something up into a set of kind of framings and ideas that certain people are going to respond one way to, and other people are going to respond a different way to. And the animal rights movement is phenomenal at this. They're incredible at doing this effectively.
Oh, I know.
And so that was something I took from that, because I felt that I was pulled out of the conversation, and it when so, and I mean, I don't know, I don't want to at all, hang Paul Bashir to dry at all. It was a great conversation and I enjoyed listening to it. But there were, when he uses language like murder and violate and things, that's reference to very specific legal and ideological ideas and frameworks. And so that is something that really stood out to me, is it pulled me out of the bigger topic and sort of had me focusing too much on that stuff.
Let me just say that is something I've run to almost. I actually did another podcast with a gentleman, an animal rights activist, and I went to his house, or this animal rights house called the Dingo Den. Mm-hmm. And this gentleman is I just don't like to say his name or his group anymore, because they've just done some stuff since then that I don't even want to promote, even as a listening tool. But I went there, and immediately what struck me, this is the first time I'd really seen it, and then I've seen it and heard it every other conversation since, is we start to get into animal rights is kind of like the civil rights movement, is kind of like the right, the movement to end slavery is kind of like, and so then I end up having to be in the uncomfortable, sometimes just position of semantics, trying to decouple slavery from hunting. And that I feel if it's not deliberate, it's certainly tactical, right? It's certainly like part of their training to get you to become uncomfortable with your own argument, because you have to set those two things beside each other. So I think that goes to your moral framing comment.
Yeah, and it is deliberate. And hey, look, I mean, as a hunting community, we have strategies and tactics that we use as well, many of which I think are great and many of which make me cringe. And I understand that different movements have different approaches and tactics. And I think this is the thing, this is sort of the rub to me, is how do we peel back those specific strategies and tactics, right, and get to some of those underlying ideas and in some cases, that will be strategic for us, because at the end of the day, no one's letting go of their long-term goals. Yeah. And so in some cases, I think, one of the things to me, I think is that this is strategic to us. If we can be a little more measured, a little more careful, and even in some cases more sympathetic to these other ideas, worst case scenario, we're going to have a better understanding of our own perspective and our own directions and our own language. Yeah. And best case scenario, we're going to have better connections with people that we didn't have before,
Yeah. Well, I mean, your article gets into the history. I want to get into the history of animal rights and then comparing it to animal welfare. But you bring up a good point that maybe we can work through, if you don't mind, prior to that. Mm-hmm. I didn't really think of it this way, but there are these kind of constructs in our own head about hunting, how we argue hunting. I always try to first start by peeling back our own dogma and saying, like, what am I really trying to say here? And that's led me to kind of like a conversation about death that is pretty infallible when you start thinking about animal rights, because then you start to compare death to death, and it gets interesting. But when I think of, okay, here's one of the, see if you agree with the analogy of the altruistic hunter. We often present the hunting community, this altruistic band of animal welfare lovers and conservationists that are out there thinning herds, and really that's like a thin veneer on why we're really out there. My philosophy or my thought about this, would love to hear you talk about it a little bit, is that there's a game theory side to hunting. You're pursuing a goal, right? A trophy in some cases, or you're pursuing a goal, and there's a lot of different inputs and outputs that are very exciting on just a game level, like the same way we play a video game, the same way we play a board game, where those things are pleasing to us psychologically and help us in a lot of ways. So while we might come off as altruistic in an argument with an animal rights person, we have a lot to unpack there. Have you done much thinking about that?
Yeah, for sure. And one of the things that I've kind of come to a lot more recently is being able to adjust our presentation of things depending on the audience. And I think getting past two issues that we have with that. So we often say, well, this is why I hunt, and this is the narrative. I hunt because of A, B, and C, and then we have a tendency in a lot of cases, or whatever. I mean, not just hunting, but anybody, right? But we have a tendency then to say, no matter what conversation I'm in, I'm going in like a ton of bricks with my A, B, and C reasons. And a lot more recently, in the last while, I've kind of really started to think about, this kind of framing element to this, and how do we adjust what we're saying to the audience? And I think we have to get past a couple things. We have to get past one, this idea that we are somehow being politically correct, or all these other accusations that I sometimes get in this. Well, you're just pandering, right? And then the second thing I think we need to get past is the idea that we are being somehow dishonest by doing that, by adjusting the way we frame things. And I don't think either of the two things are true. I think I hunt for many reasons, and it's very complex to me in my own head. And so to kind of pull at different threads at different times is not pandering. It's not bowing down or bending over to anyone. It's about saying, you know what, this is such an important activity to me, and this is so meaningful and profound to me, that no matter what the perspective is you come from, I have a way to relate to that, because hunting touches so many different parts of what I think and what I believe and how I move through the world, that I can find something to relate to on that. And then again, not feeling like we're being sort of dishonest to it by not saying, well, no, I have to cover how much money we raise as well, because not everyone's thinking about that. Now, people don't necessarily, if people are morally opposed to killing animals, telling them that you pay to kill animals doesn't make any sense to them, and understandably. So in this, I think, comes back to something else that I really took from your conversation with Paul that I found really sort of insightful in a way. So one of the things that, I don't want to keep bringing it back to this, but it kind of connects here. Is one of the things that you both talked a lot about was getting closer to food, and in this case, getting closer to the death that is inevitable in food, and taking that on, right, carrying that burden. And to me, where it went in my head when I heard you guys talking about that was sort of the flip side of that, which is that hunting to me is about taking control of the animal welfare part of things.
Yeah.
That I'm taking an active role in ensuring to the greatest extent possible that I am looking out for animal welfare. And so, yes, it's death, but I'm ensuring as much as I possibly can that I'm taking that under my own kind of wing. And that's why I kind of come back to this animal welfare part of things, that if, as hunters, if we can kind of think about this and embrace this, I mean, it's, and not shy away from the idea that as hunters, we are animal welfareists. And we would extend that to probably say that we are wildlife welfareists, and we are habitat welfareists, and we are, ecological process welfareists, right? And that's, I think, comes back to this idea about, we can adjust our messaging depending on who we're talking to and what will speak to them.
Yeah, I've always been, and I've come to this through a lot of conversations like the one I had with Paul Bashir, where there are the things I say I hunt, the reasons I say that I hunt and then there are like the value that hunting brings to me personally. And that's hard to understand, even in your own mind. You know, I'm going to say why on a broad scale hunting is good for society, and then I'm going to say on my own personal scale why it's good for me. And a lot of times it is, you know, a building skills and understanding animals in a very intimate way, and those things are they're very personal things. And what I saw that Paul does, they do the same thing. They have the same kind of micro, macro reasons for being animal rights activists. They want to save the world, but they also want to save themselves in a lot of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's one of the big, I think, differences between the animal rights kind of philosophy and subsequently the animal rights movement, and where David Peterson, the writer David Peterson, talks about, you know, different kinds of hunters, and one of them he talks about is the nature hunter, right? So people who would think about the landscape on a bigger level, and I think that's one of the differences. Is this is also the focus, or not on, or to the extent to which we focus on individuality, and versus versus the whole, or the you know, and this is something we talk about as hunters. I think about the herd, not the individual, right? And that can be, in this case, a bit of a metaphor as well, that I'm thinking about, you know, the welfare of the whole, and not the rights of the one, right?
Yeah. Well, and then you think of a lot of animal rights activists, and a lot of the way that they decry hunting is to look at a motivation in a singular sense, right? The dentist that killed the lion. What was that dentist doing over there? Why would he be over there? Why does he want to do that? Right? It becomes a straw man. And easily to kick over. I've recently seen something going around in the animal rights community around coyote killing contests that makes hunters look like heartless bastards who kill, you know, to notch their belts. And so those things, while those things are interesting conversations and useful conversations in terms of like the fringe parts of hunting, it's nothing but a straw man when it comes to how we characterize each other. And I always encourage hunters not to do that to animal rights folks. Not every animal rights activist is Pam Anderson.
Right.
And it's important not to decry that when it happens to us, but then turn around and apply that to the other.
Yeah. And that is so important. And I mean, I think there's two things that come to mind to me there. That's such an important point. And in as much as we talk about the hunting community being so different, it's made up of people that disagree with some things and agree with some things, and you know, where it's so complex. It would be a mistake to think that the animal rights community is as homogenous as the outward kind of billboards and slogans that the organizations put out.
Right.
Right. And I that's an important point to not kind of paint them with one brush. And I had a great conversation, and again, I won't say his name here, but I had a great kind of private conversation with someone who's, I don't know if he would consider himself an animal rights activist, but he certainly kind of advocates for anti-trapping, and in a lot of cases, what he would describe as anti-trophy hunting activities. And anyway, we were speaking privately, and he said, you know, in some cases, he would not consider this species to be a trophy hunt, quote, trophy hunt species, whereas officially, sort of in the animal rights community, they would. And it got me to thinking about, you know, how comfortable would he be saying publicly, no, I don't think that species should qualify for this kind of opposition to hunting, because he's just as much kind of pressured by his kind of community and in-group as in some cases hunters are. And it makes me kind of then come back to the second piece there, which is that I think hunters also need to be willing to demonstrate that internal kind of difference. And it doesn't mean that we are, you know, cracking the statue to pieces. It means that we're demonstrating that we can do for ourselves and within our own community. We can have debates, and we can dig into things ethically, and we can disagree on things, and we can occupy spaces of a seeming contradiction, and it reduces the ability of those that would oppose us and anti-hunters, and I distinguish that from non-hunters, but anti-hunters, it reduces their ability to say, see, all of you hunters are the same. Because if we remove that ability and we show that no, there is division, and we are willing to have these debates internally in our own community, I think that sets an important example that shows that no, we're not all just blindly following one another, but it also allows us to connect with people who say, I disagree with coyote contests, but I don't necessarily disagree with coyote hunting. And that's where I stand on the matter. I think presenting hunting as a contest, I find it horrible, but I don't disagree. I wear coyote fur. I don't disagree with coyote hunting and trapping. And so I can connect with people who are not hunters, who might share that perspective. And,
Yeah, I've come to through conversations like those with Paul Bashir and others I've had. Because I said before, and I've said on this show many times, I try to strip away the dogma that I was taught when I walked into hunting at the age of 12. Not that my dad taught me any of this stuff, but just kind of the stuff that seemed like it was baked into the industry. Maybe when I walked in, like ways of thinking. Animal rights folks are all emotion, and no facts, and they're all this and all that. And as I got through there, I really realized that a lot of that is true, but it's true and it's only a certain faction. So when I look at like animal rights, I see animal rights activists as way different than someone who tends to agree with animal rights rather than a hunting or conservation side of the coin. So in an activist group, especially animal rights activists, there are a lot of very much emotional pandering that goes on. You saw it with Paul Bashir. Like you said, there's moral framing involved. And you get you build an activist movement that's very hollow. It's kind of got a thick shell, but it's hollow on the inside because the way that you recruit people is through emotion. It's through slaughterhouse videos and the video I mentioned.
And that doesn't last, right? Like emotion is fleeting.
Yeah, it can't last. So right, you put a video up online of a bunch of coyotes that were killed in a coyote contest, and you recruit somebody to your ideology that way, and they become an activist. They may get a year or two down the road and not understand why they believe what they believe.
And you know what? I'm hoping that I'm the person who gets to talk to them and say, hey, look, I agree with you about the contest, but now let me tell you about another aspect of this. And I don't need that person to become a hunter or a trapper. But if I can bring to them the same kind of complexity or the idea that there is complexity to this, then that's success, right?
No, it is.
Absolutely.
And I think what you just described is what I hope can continue to kind of be the norm. And what I was what I hoped in my mind's eye, like maybe displayed with Paul Bashir personally, is that hunting activism can be agnostic. Hunting activism can be just us talking about what our value systems and how we see conservation. It doesn't need to be emotional. Screw the antis, screw the libs, screw the hold on to. It doesn't need to be that. And in fact, we have a better chance of winning over the non-hunter, which is at some level is who we ultimately want to be talking to, if we approach our own activism with our whole heart and our heads and our emotion, but also our objectivity.
Yes, exactly. And that's where I think, like, if we can start to think about the specific language that we're using, and as an example, animal welfare, if we can start to use that to the non-hunting public who might respond to that and who might kind of have a more automatic sympathy to that term than science-based wildlife management, for instance, then that's great. Then I'll use that term and I'll emphasize how hunters are animal welfareists, and we'll use that. And the byproduct or the kind of happy side effect is that we're kind of taking that narrative by the reins, and we're saying, we're going to use that term. And we're going to remove one more from the lexicon of things that can be against hunting, because, as we said, most of the public is not against hunting.
Yeah.
And so I want to meet them where they are.
It's weird, right? It's like one of those things I said a couple of weeks ago on this show. People already know I say it all the time. It's like hunting. You can get 100% acceptance, social acceptance of hunting just by skinning it differently, by approaching the question differently. I mean, you could say, do you like killing contests where hunters go out and people, you would probably get 5% yes and 95% no. But you could be like, what about somebody who lives in Alaska and kills coyotes by the dozens and wears their fur and eats their flesh? And you would flip that 95-5 the other way in terms of acceptance.
And that's where the survey data, that's what it's finding, right? Is that when you ask people individual motivations for hunting, the approval ratings are far different. And there was a recent paper that came out in an academic journal around the social license to hunt. And that was what it was sort of getting at, was when the public perceives that the purpose of hunting, so both the purpose and the outcome are certain things. In this paper, I think somewhat problematically used the concept of trophy hunting, which has never been firmly defined, but they used that and found that.
Was that Chris Darramont?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And he's great. I mean, it's a super interesting paper. Yeah, that's right. And you've had Kyle Artell on as well, I think, haven't you?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah. So it's great. And that's exactly what they're finding, right? That depending on how you talk about it, people respond to it differently, but in I think to say that differently, people connect with it differently, right?
Yeah.
O'Reilly Auto Parts are in the business of keeping your car on the road. O'Reilly Auto Parts offer friendly, helpful service and the parts knowledge you need for all your maintenance and repairs. If you're confused about what part you need, like what wipers are going to be the best, what replacement headlights are going to be the best, go into O'Reilly and talk to the people that work there, because they're great and they're super friendly, and they'll get you squared away where you walk out knowing you got the right thing. They've got thousands of parts and accessories in stock, either in-store or online, so you never have to worry if you're in a jam. Do you need your windshield wipers replaced? You need a brake light fixed? You need some quick service? They'll help you find the right part or point you to the nearest local repair shop for help. The professional parts people at O'Reilly Auto Parts are your one-stop shop for all things auto do-it-yourself, and you can find what you need in-store or online. Stop by O'Reilly Auto Parts today or visit us at O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. That's O'ReillyAuto.com/MeatEater. There's nothing like snook hook sets at dawn or catching a tarpon in the moonlight. Find your next fishing trip made easy on fishingbooker.com and experience the magic of the Sunshine State or any other destination on your fishing bucket list. Book a blue water adventure in search of sailfish or go snapper fishing with the kids. With over 6,000 captains and trips to choose from, planning your next one just got a whole lot easier. Download the Fishing Booker app on the Google Play or App Store, or visit them online at fishingbooker.com to book your trip today. You ever get that feeling you're stuck inside staring at screens and a primal urge kicks in? You crave wide open spaces, fresh air, the chance to connect with the land. Well, maybe it's time to find your own piece of the wild, but searching for property can be a maze. That's where land.com comes in. They got millions of listings across the country, from mountain ranches to hidden fishing holes. Their search tools are like a seasoned guide helping you narrow down what you want. Land.com isn't just about buying and selling. It's about finding a place to hunt, fish, explore, or simply sit by a campfire and listen to the crickets. So head over to land.com today to turn one day into today, because trust me, there's nothing quite like the feeling of standing on your own piece of earth.
I try to think of, like, are there parallels in our culture where it's not like basketball? It's not like there are a whole lot of, like, knitting, a whole lot of pastimes that a guy might get into, that he's thrust into this paradox or thrust into this moral ambiguity where it's like, well, why do you, it's cool with me if you do it this way, but it's not cool. If I play basketball and I shoot granny style, it's cool. If I shoot a hook shot, it's cool too. Like that's not apples to apples.
And no one feels that you're threatening their entire philosophy of life because of that, right?
And I think guns are that way too a little bit. I mean, it's all kind of a jambalaya of bullshit in my opinion, but it's like it is for something that you can do as a pastime, which is a good explanation for how I spend a lot of my time. It's unique in the way that it's so malleable based on the way it's described.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, maybe I'm sort of like a fly drawn to the lamp with this, but that's partly why I enjoy it so much. It's because it's it's difficult and it's challenging, and it's not, you don't just sort of untie your boots and leave it at the door when you come home. It chases you around all day and everything you're doing, and that's something that I enjoy about it, and why that and they say why I try to kind of figure out, well, how do I connect this with all different parts of my life? Whether that's, in my case, was my kind of academic pursuits or my kind of social and political interests as well, and that's, that is what kind of makes it really interesting to me. I think that's probably why I'm not interested in basketball.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably why this podcast exists, because it's just infinitely. Sometimes you just feel like you're just talking in circles, and it's just this intellectual game that you're playing with yourself just to satiate your own need to explore things. Sometimes it feels like that. I get that. But sometimes you actually get somewhere where there is an epiphany, and you do start to see your own activities in the woods differently. And so I think it's probably 50-50 half the time. The time I'm just spinning my wheels and trying to get there and sounding like maybe a little bit pretentious now and then, and half the time I'm getting somewhere where I'm digging in and finding out why I think a certain way or why I react a certain way.
And I'm really happy. I mean, I don't know to what extent this is changing. I mean, I might talk to an 80-year-old hunter who says, no, the hunting, it's always been like this. There's always been pockets of the hunting community that have just fed off of this kind of discussion and philosophical debate. So maybe it is, maybe it's, but I certainly am excited that I didn't think that I would be able to, when I got into hunting, I didn't think that I'd be able to write, things about the intricate differences between animal rights and animal welfare, and that if I did, anyone would read it. And I originally wrote this piece for for Hunt to Eats blog, and I thought like, oh, so there's actually companies and platforms out there that are moving this stuff along. And I mean, then it was just like, couldn't get enough of it. Right.
Yeah. It's a different connection to hunting. People ask, what's this about? What's this show about? What's your, what angle do you take? I'm like, I don't, I just I'm going the way that's interesting to me. And that's the cool thing about this, that subject matter, that you can go just about, if you want to just get into the craft, go for it. Go learn how to do every little intricate thing. If you want to get into how it affects our culture, jump there. If you want to get into how it affects our minds and the way we think about animals and think about values and why, I mean, you go any direction.
It's there, and it's all out there. Those discussions are all happening, right? And I hope that, we kind of going off on a bunch of different tangents here, but
I was going to get you. I was just going to we need to explain rights versus welfare.
So that's actually what I was going to kind of say here was that I hope that there's, I hope that somewhere out there people are writing about the history of the hunting, the hunting conservation movement in the way that I dug into the animal rights movement and found. To kind of go back to that, is that a good time? Can I dig into that a bit?
We were jiving on that. I was like, we got to get back to that. We went too far.
Yeah. So when I started looking into it, the animal rights movement, I found that, and I described this, I found there was a pretty clear distinction in history between animal rights as a philosophy and animal rights that became what people now think of as the movement, right? As people associate with PETA and Humane Society and different organizations. And I didn't know that. I didn't know that they were kind of distinct like that. When I started looking into the history of the animal rights movement, because I was guilty of it. I used animal rights, animal welfare, all these things interchangeably. And I found that it emerged in the 1800s, really as a way to focus on treating domestic farm animals better, and as a way to end, in many cases, the live experimentation on animals for scientific purposes. And I kind of looked at that and went and thought, like, who doesn't agree with that? Who doesn't? Who can't see themselves in that? And so that was, and then later it was as we kind of moved into the 1900s that turned more into an organized political movement. And animal rights organizations at the time talked about that in the sense of that they needed to find some overarching moral argument that defined the whole movement. And that kind of moral argument became applying the concept of human rights to animals. And I find for me, what I sort of take issue with more than anything, I think, is about the movement and the concept is thinking that we're going to apply what to me is an imperfect concept in human culture around rights and law to animals. And that's how we should define our interaction with animals. And I think, I think that's missing something to me. I don't think that goes deep enough, to be honest, about how we think about our interaction with animals. It's just applying another kind of contrived idea, which is the concept of rights that can change and that has changed.
Yeah, there's so many. What was interesting to me in reading through your paper is that you kind of connected points in time. I guess in a way, it kind of pulls away the veneer of this modern animal rights thought that it's so sensationalized and it's so emotional, and it kind of grounds it into some really relevant places in time in our culture. I mean, you talk about in a book called in 1987, a book called Second Nature: The Animal Rights Controversy. There's a quote. I'll say this guy's name. His name is Alan Herskovy.
Yeah. He runs a Canadian organization called Truth About Fur.
Yeah, Herskovich suggests that after biblical times, the first glimmers of concern for animals appear in the work of certain Greek and Roman writers who questioned the central role of man in creation. And this goes even further to philosophers like Pythagoras and down the line to where they believe that humans have a fellowship with animals. So, quote, if we kill them and eat their flesh, we commit injustice and impiety inasmuch as we are killing for our own kin. Right? So this is kind of deep in the way that we thought about our own humanity, huh?
Yeah. And I think that one of the things to emphasize, and I think in some ways it comes back to how we started the conversation around the people now who kind of define the hunting community, is that these ways of thinking, he talks about Pythagoras, who was a Greek philosopher, and biblical times. And so a lot of the knowledge and ideas that define that the animal rights movement kind of took up are very Western European. It became Western European concepts, right? Around the distinction between humans and animals or not, and the idea of rights applying to, the rights of man, that Thomas Paine's text. But not all, and I won't speak to it because I'm not from any of these cultures, but there are hundreds and thousands of cultures in the world who don't have knowledge systems built on these concepts. And so at the end of the day, we also need to kind of realize that the concept of kind of animal rights is rooted in a very European way of thinking that not all cultures share.
Well, when you connect it to, like you said, Thomas Paine's Rights of Man, you talk about how they explored this like emerging legal concept of rights, and then also how they apply that to those same concepts to animals. And that, again, we still struggle with that today. I mean, you're talking about Thomas Paine's writing in 1791. And we're still looking at kind of like what's a human right, what's an animal right, how do we, because we have basically dominion over animals, how do we apply our own morality to our interaction with them? these are all very real and very deserving topics. As you say at the end of this section of your paper, that, you know, anything that's shaped over 2,000 years deserves our consideration.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the thesis right here. That
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, totally. And I think that's actually a piece I wrote for Truth About Fur at one point, kind of was inspired by some of Alan's work, sort of digs into this idea that a lot of the discussions that we have around this, including, many discussions we have around these topics, start from a place that killing is wrong and death is some version of injustice, immoral, unethical, right? And we start from that place that death is by definition a harm. And when we take the time to actually question that, and then of course we get into people, people who criticize hunting will say, well, you're just trying to justify killing. But when we think about that, it's not a universal truth, and it's not even if you study ethics, that killing is wrong and that death is wrong. That comes from a very specific intellectual tradition around ethics. Do you know the concept of doing harm to others, and therefore, if you take a life, that's harm, and therefore it's wrong. But I think we really have to go back further than that. I think we really need to strip that back, like you say, take that veneer off of that, and kind of go back further on that and say, is all death wrong? Maybe we don't want to get into this answer.
Oh, this is my favorite part. But
that's the question, right? Yeah. Is it inherently, again, is it injustice, immoral, wrong, whatever the word is that you would use? Because I think we do a disservice to the conversation by taking that for granted and starting there. Because what we then do is we start to build arguments on a foundation that we haven't actually laid ourselves and don't understand ourselves.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that's what sometimes bothers me about the animal rights discussions. Is it's not the idea, it's not the intent, it's not the position. It's that when people talk about violating the rights of animals, I'm not violating the right of an animal. I'm doing something far more profound. I'm killing it.
Yeah.
And that's, to me, much more serious than violating its rights. And I think we need to better understand and articulate our feelings and understandings and where those come from about death and killing and those interactions, right?
Yeah. That's where I think when we talk about, those conversations with folks like Paul, you got to start where they start, but then you eventually just start peeling away the layers and get to the death conversation. That's just where it has to go. Mm-hmm. And to your point, when you think about animal rights, what's the animal have the right to do, right? The animal has really the right to not a whole lot based on how we move around based on how we build roads and based on how we fly in the air and based on how we move around. We apply, to the environment based on our own needs. And so, like you said there, me driving down the road may violate that animal's right to be in that road. The fact that the road is even there may violate in and of itself that animal's right to move through that area without some imminent harm from me, right? Like that's it violates the habitat's right.
Yes, to exist without a road peeling through it, right? And I think that's another way that I'd like to see. And I won't pretend to be an expert on the animal rights history and movement at all, but that's something that I have not seen as much discussion. I'd like to see a bit more kind of discussion around that. Is what about habitat rights then, or habitat welfare, in as it were? Like, how do we kind of then start to talk about the rights of clean water? And there, in fact, there are cases where in Australia, I believe, communities are designating areas of land and water legal entities under law, and so they are then those areas of habitat are very literally entitled to the rights that people would be.
Yeah,
and I think there's discussion there around, well, isn't the rights framework still just as flawed? But it's a fascinating approach to extending, going beyond what is the common critique of the animal rights movement, which is that it's really focused on the deer and not deer, and applying this idea to habitat and to landscapes. And I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, because I think some things are kind of spiraling towards each other, or careening towards each other here in ways that even they don't understand. Because if you have you line up animal rights with environmentalism, and the way that both of these ideologies are kind of just driving towards each other, where they might soon crash, and also in some ways where they're connected. So people talk about meat and how meat, just the commercialization of large scale animal agriculture, contributes to climate change. And that also we couple that together with animal rights. And then I've seen guys like Paul Bashir trip over those things. Like, they don't understand the origins of both of those thought processes and how they came to couple them together. But they're just part of kind of the dogma. They're part of the playbook. And so they get connected in a way that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense, because all you have to say is, and as we've already discussed in this show, all you have to say is, well, if you stop eating animals, you got to eat something. And that means you got to destroy habitat. And that means you got to kill a lot of animals. And that means you got to displace a lot of other animals that'll die of starvation or die by getting hit by a car. And that was actually something that I found really interesting. He mentioned, at some point he said, I'm paraphrasing, but he said, vegans aren't stupid. We don't think that we would value that a single bug would be at the same value as a single elk. And that was so fascinating to me, because I thought, but that's interesting, because that's where I actually fundamentally disagree. Yeah.
As a concept, that when I think about natural processes, you brought this up in that conversation around whether that's pollination or nutrient cycling, the transport of pollutants on air currents, whatever the case is, I'm thinking about it on these process levels. And so I don't think about clearing thousands of acres for monoculture necessarily as the damage being measured and only the sum of the bugs that are killed and the birds' nests that are destroyed, but the interruption of processes.
Exactly. Yeah.
And to me, then it's that ends up being far more profound. But I also don't like to get into this balance sheet thing of, I killed an elk. Well, I mowed down a bunch of field mice. Well, I don't like to get into that, because I think I don't see that bringing us to better understanding.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing when I listen, or I at least think back, because I can't listen back, but I think back to that conversation. I think all that you get there with somebody like Paul is, you say, like, you get to admit that there are levels to things, because it's not the people for the ethical treatment of animals depending. Like, that's not what it's called, because that would be
in context.
Yeah, it's like PTAD. We should start something called the people for the ethical treatment of animals depending, right? Yeah. Like, that's not what that's not what the social movement says. The social movement is absolutist in its nature and the way that it presents the conundrum. It's either you're a murderer or you're not. But then the kind of the tit for tat that you explained there, all that does is strip away that absolutism. It just takes it away, because, like, there's no way that stands up to any criticism at all, or any intellectual debate. Most absolutism doesn't anyway. But
and I think that's like, when I think, what do we learn about? Because there should always be some takeaway for ourselves too, right? And then what do we learn about our own community in this? And I think it's the same lesson. Absolute is, and kind of, and those types of arguments, they're appealing to us because we feel like safer in saying something that we feel like can apply across every board, but it doesn't. And so I think for the hunting community, it's the same lesson. Let's not shy away from the intricacies and the complexities of these things, because we are capable of it. We have shown that for many, many years, that we're capable of dealing with those things and meeting them head on. And so let's not do that ourselves, right?
Yeah, I think in your paper, you can kind of you can play Mad Libs with your paper and just take the word animal rights out and put in hunting, and you get the same. Yeah, so you have in here.
You're giving away my secrets here, Dan.
That's it, man. You can it's interchangeable, but it is like you said. By the 1970s, animal rights advocates begin to recognize that they needed to move away from what Herskovich describes as a focus on individual problems to develop a comprehensive moral argument for animal rights. Now, you could take away the word animal rights and say Ben O'Brien describes a focus on individual problems, and we need to develop a more comprehensive moral argument for hunting. You could do the same thing because conservation is regional and it's ecosystem based, and coyote killing contests are different in different settings. So it's either this comprehensive moral argument for hunting, or we address individual ecosystem problems and individual problems of wildlife management in the context of where they are.
Yeah.
And and this is the thing that might be interesting to hear you talk about. We have got into this idea of guard the gate on this show before, which means we had a California bear ban bill that came up a few weeks ago, and I've talked about some of the logical fallacies around the slippery slope, and whether you really think that's a fallacy is probably a different conversation. But I go back and forth, and I will admit to vacillating between guard the gate as something, as a philosophy of like, don't let them take an inch because they'll take it all in terms of animal rights activists and legislation. But then also within the conversation like we're doing here, you don't want to guard the gate intellectually, but you do have animal rights groups that will legislatively take an inch and then take another inch, then take another inch, then take another inch. And so there is like a paradox in there, I think.
Oh yeah, there's totally a paradox, and I mean, and I do it all the time. I mean, like I try to preface a lot of these things by saying, that I'll take full ownership of my own hypocrisies, because that also allows me to just have them as much as I want. Because I say, well, I can own them. That's okay now.
Yeah, self-awareness is good.
That's right.
It's like a good trap door.
Card.
Yeah, it's a good. I'm an asshole. Hey, Paul, I'm an asshole. Okay.
And I'll go to all kinds of moral acrobatics to justify why in this case it's okay for me to make a comprehensive moral argument, but in every other case you shouldn't do it, right? But yeah, it is a paradox, and I, to just be totally honest about it, I found myself not identifying with the guard the gate kind of approach because, and it comes back to the framing piece a little bit for me. I don't like the idea that of a sort of a fence between us and them. Mm-hmm. A gate necessarily by definition implies someone's in, someone's out. And I get that it's of course a metaphor, but I think, but I mean, there's also a lot of discussion out there about how the metaphors that we use are taken up by the public.
Yeah.
And to me, I think that this idea that we are guarding and therefore preventing or admitting, depending on certain criteria, I find that that's perhaps not the way to connect with the people who are not trying to storm the gate, but they're certainly watching what's going on, and they're not coming in either because we are presenting it as a gate, as a sort of a barricade to them. And I think, to me, I'm much more. I feel like SB 252, that the bear hunting bill in California, that got struck down, and British Columbia, they did ban the grizzly hunt. It was probably not the best move scientifically, but they responded to social pressure, and so I feel that, like, if I kind of think about the different approaches to this and what I think is a better way for the hunting world to go, I think that we can respond to things as they come up. And in many cases, we've shown a real ability to respond well and to prevent the inch from being taken. But I think it's important that I think it's worth doing it in that way and not risking the idea that we are kind of gating or preventing. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
100%. I think it bakes in two ideas that I've struggled with, and openly, because I think everybody, these are such broad topics that it would be hard not to struggle with them on some level. Yeah. But I always, I think of like, guard to gate is a tangible way to guard against and to heighten our awareness of what we would call attacks on the privilege of hunting, right? Banning something that we do based on, by people that do not do it, basically. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I want to guard the gate against that, and how I guard the gate is not as probably, it's probably a little bit more open than most people. So tangibly, that term works in that context. But if I remove it and put it in a philosophical conversation or ideological conversations around hunting, it's useless.
Yeah,
it's probably a harm more than a good.
Yeah.
And so I like to have it when somebody puts up a ban, somebody in San Francisco wants to ban bear hunting across the state. It becomes this thing like, listen, we've got to guard against this thing fiercely so they know how much we value it. That's a very gray area. That's a very delicate thing to do without becoming an activist in the way that we decry Paul Bashir might for being an activist. So it's a very delicate dance, that one. But in this conversation that's more philosophical, guard the gate is useless because you get nowhere.
Yeah, it's a good point. That's a really good point. And I think that is something. And I think this is what you and I have been sort of saying for the whole time in a roundabout, or like we've been kind of circling this, is that it's okay that the conversation changes. That in a philosophical discussion, we recognize that that's perhaps not the best analogy or metaphor to use. But when it comes to mobilizing hunters to take action and inspiring them to take action, maybe it's instrumental in that way. And it shouldn't necessarily, and this comes back to this kind of comprehensive argument idea, right? That it doesn't have to be relevant and perfect in every situation, every context.
Yeah.
That's okay, because it does what it's supposed to do and what we need it to do in some situations. And maybe and I think that what we just need to make sure we do is emphasize that is the case, that we are using this particular framing or metaphor in this case and not in others.
Yeah. Well, and to just understand the pitfalls of that kind of it becomes, I guess, let me try to explain something I've seen in our industry. And this happens with the National Rifle Association. It happens with almost every time there's a threat out there for something. People gather around things that are threatened, that they value. And so it's, this is true in our media. This is true in our society. Making someone scared makes them active often. Making someone angry makes them active. And so in our attention economy, and even in the conservation space, if I tell you public lands are at risk every single day, every single minute, if you wake up not thinking about that, somebody's taking your public land, you'll probably give me more money for my conservation group. You'll probably do more for me, rather than in the case of the bear ban saying like this not everything's bad, but this particular one, this one's bad. So fight like hell against this one, but be very, be very reticent to fight like hell in other ways. Like be a listener most of the time and a fighter when you need to be.
So like one of the things that I think about that, and I don't know, I'm interested in your thoughts on this too, is, and I'll to give some American examples, but there are many in Canada as well, and I'm sure you have Canadian listeners, but how do we then, okay, how am I trying to say this? So we see in the last little while, right, we saw in the States, Tongass opened up.
Yep. And
Arctic National Wildlife Refuge opened up. And in Canada, to give a Canadian example, we saw just yesterday or today approval of the Site C dam in British Columbia that's going to have devastating impacts on wildlife and lands. And how do we move to a point where, I think in a lot of cases that issue, and we can think about the same thing with climate change, a more kind of nebulous example, but those things are seen as, well, but that's a left wing, that's a liberal issue, that's a liberal fight, and this, I'm a conservative or a right wing, and so people don't mobilize on that. But how do we get to a point where something like that, something like Tongass or something like this dam in British Columbia, that those become a guard the gate issue?
Yeah.
Right. And how do we get past that? Like, people are hung up on those, I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think in some cases people are hung up on those because of perceived political affiliations of those.
Yeah, because what happens is, here's what ends up happening, and I've been tried to be as honest as I can on this podcast about this, because I think it is important. I've said, listen, I love the Second Amendment. I love my guns. In some ways, I am in favor of constitutional carry, and I'm a libertarian in a lot of ways. But I also love the environment. I'm an environmentalist. I love public lands. I don't craft my ideology based on the buckets that have been, or the containers that society has provided. I just don't. And that opens me up to hate from both sides, right? So you just have to be willing to say, I've said publicly, I voted for Joe Biden. Got a problem with it? Let's talk. But if you don't want to be around me because I voted for Joe Biden, I probably didn't want to be around you anyway. And so it's much bigger than, I think it's much, much bigger than I think just the Tongass or just some bill to ban AR-15s in Canada or in America. I think it's being able to have, really at some level, the honesty, the transparency, but also the bravery to say, like, here's a complex set of values that I hold, and here's how I got there. Some of these values are malleable, some of them aren't. And being able to let that be what it is and not have to be, cut up like a whaler cuts up a whale, and used wholly for one side or the other.
And to feel like your entire identity is threatened. Because of one.
Yeah, I'll fight for the Tongass, and I'll also tell, and I'll fight for my AR-15s. I'll tell Justin. No,
I often say that I'm a political mess. I'm homeless politically. I have voted for every party in Canada.
Yeah, and then everybody will say to me, like, your guy Joe Biden. I said, you know what? Listen, Joe Biden's doing a lot of stuff I'm going to fight him wholly against. If he starts passing, I know when I voted for him, he's going to pass gun control legislation. I know, and I'm going to fight him with all that I have. And I don't feel ashamed about that issue, because that is me having a complex set of beliefs that don't always line up with even the people I voted for. So it's like, I think that's an honesty. If we can all start to have that, and if we can slough off the social pressures to adhere, the self-censorship that we all partake in, whether we like it or not. If we can get away from that, then we can start to find ourselves in a position where maybe we can, maybe like you and I can start to collect around ideas that are plucked from each side that we all agree on.
Well, totally. And I think, like, I often try to spin it on myself, and I go, okay, well, I'm asking this person, whether they're animal rights activists, I'm asking them to acknowledge that they see something from my perspective and that we might agree. And I think, like, to use maybe a blunt example or a bit of a low-hanging fruit, I go, well, can I understand the idea of rights? Now, it's a bit different for me because we actually don't have gun rights in Canada, but you see where I'm going with this, that it's like, well, if we think about things like hunting rights and gun rights, I can understand the concept of the importance of rights and how fundamental and profound that idea is. And so then I find, okay, I can see the place that person's thinking is in.
Yeah.
Right. And realize that it's not a totally alien concept that they're coming from. I have a frame of reference for that.
Yeah, I do too. And I can see why sometimes people get spun into, hey, are we going to chop down some old growth forests in the Tongass in Alaska? That's going to create jobs. And like, okay, well, like, I can see, let's talk about that. And let's try to come to at least some amenable way to approach the topic, rather than just beating each other up with the polarized versions of the conversation. Unfortunately, the discourse doesn't allow that most times.
Well, no, and I think that's one of the things I really try and do too, and it doesn't work anywhere near half the time probably, but is to kind of, define the terms a little bit. And I said earlier, right, if you tell someone who's opposed to killing animals, but it's okay, I pay for it, And I kind of go like, what are the terms we're discussing here? And let's make sure that we're not, if like sometimes we talk about, apples and oranges, I mean, sometimes we're in completely different food groups. And so let's at least get to understand, what is it we're talking about here? What is and like you said, find out where people are coming from. Let's start there then. And one of us has to be willing to shift. And so let's figure out what it is we're talking about and where we're starting from, and at least make sure we're talking from the same place. Because you're right. If somebody is addressing an issue of land sale from the perspective of jobs, and you're addressing it from the perspective of environmental justice, Well, they're completely different things.
Yeah.
And the approach might better be to talk about how, you know what, it's actually not going to be that economically profitable. Yeah. And this comes up in the climate change discussion all the time. We talk about, and I've done a lot of work in climate change research, if you're talking to conservative or typically people who would think of themselves as conservative or right-leaning political affiliations, you got to talk about the economics and the rights element of it, and individual rights, sort of individual well-being, and not focus on so much of the environmental justice and morality of it, because that's just not what they're going to respond to, and that's okay.
Because that's a part of it. You can't remove that from the conversation. But I always, in talking to a lot of animal rights folks, and I said this, the thing with the interview with Paul Bashir, he started out, I'm sure you heard it, he was real prickly starting out. He didn't want to talk to me. And by the end, we were having a conversation. And before he hung up, after off air, he was like, I'd love to have that conversation again. I appreciate you. I appreciate the way you approach that. And that was it. That's all I really wanted out of that. I was never going to move him very far. And what I always tell people, and what I hope can be true one day, is that we can start all these very necessary disagreements. Like, just imagine that we're standing back to back or standing face to face in the spot where we agree, and then slowly walking away as we dig deeper into the disagreement.
And also not being afraid to take a step towards the other person when they say something that you do agree with. And I think that that's super key too, right? Is we know that we're probably going to end up on opposite sides of them eventually, but we don't have to go running to those sides of the room.
Well, most conversations in our society start with us at different sides of the room.
Well, that's true.
And we yell at each other from the other side of the room, and neither of us. It's like the game of I win if you take a step towards me. The way I like to take those conversations is like, I'm in the same place as you to start, and then let's walk away from each other, but talking as we go. And that way, at least if we get to the other end of the room where we're yelling at each other, at least we can stop and think, wait a minute, weren't we just in the middle of the room together?
That's a good metaphor for that, or sort of analogy there, because I think where that also leads us to is it's okay to stop moving back at any point if we realize we're shouting a bit too much to be heard here. Let's just pause for a minute here, right? And and the speed. I mean, we kind of feel pressured, to get everything out in 280 characters or less, and to but this is the speed that we feel like we need to get through all these issues is not doing us any favors.
Well, that's for me and you, I'm sure we would agree that one of the reasons we love this conservation and hunting is how quickly we can get to where we are right now. We can start from we love animals, we like killing animals, what should we do, animal rights, and next thing you know, you're at this very broad socio-political conversation that has nothing to do with killing a turkey. People will often say, this is a hunting show. I'm like, oh, only kind of maybe by name. But you say there's a quote in the conclusion of your article when you're really talking about that disagreement is not the problem. It is that each side digs in and clings tightly to its ideology. And there's a quote in there from I think you said Fraser and Priest, but I'm not sure what's that. Who those folks are. You probably referenced them earlier in the piece. Yeah,
so they wrote a paper on animal ethics.
So in that paper they said, lacking any agreement on an appropriate methodology for resolving the contradictions, it is hard to imagine that the current approaches will move towards consensus. We could have just read that quote, would have saved us about 10 minutes of podcasting. but that is it, and it is just at the end of the day, it's these kind of back and forth that ours really is moving forward in agreement, but it's the same thing. It's really the same exercise as talking to Paul Bashir.
It is, and I took notice at the end when you said, "Okay, floor is yours. What do you want to say?" And then that was the end of it. You didn't respond to what he said, and I don't know if this was just because the conversation was ending, or maybe I'm reading too much into this, but his whole tone changed during the closing. He said his last piece, and he changed how he said that. I mean, I'm sure a linguist would have a heyday with this, but when you asked him, anything else you want to say, and he said, "Here's what I would ask hunters to think about this." And his whole approach changed there. He wasn't telling anymore. He was inviting and welcoming and asking people to think about something. And it totally changed the nature of how he said it, but how I heard it as well. And I was already interested in thinking about his perspective, but the way that he changed that, and I think that that's this sort of calling in versus calling out approach. And I think that that's such an important way to do things. And I mean, I've had similar experiences, where I've been on Twitter and getting fired up with someone, and one of us reaches out and messages the other person privately, and immediately the audience is gone. The need to show off is gone. And I mean, I've now connected with people who would be on totally different sides of a spectrum to me. And we realize that maybe the spectrum is not binary anymore, and that personal connection is super key.
I've seen it, man. Performative outrage is all the rage, I guess you would say. But yeah, I've seen it and also in a way that it shapes like piling on. Somebody puts a negative thing up, and then somebody else feels like, oh yeah. I do that with sometimes movie reviews. If I hate a movie, I will go to Rotten Tomatoes, and if it's got a 10%, and everybody hates it, I'll be like, yes, great. Everybody hates it and I hate it. But if I go there and I hated it, I will, and everybody loved it, I'll go find the 1 star and I'll go, oh yeah, that's good. That guy hated it too. So those are things that we all do, man. It's like this is a natural, when it's happening to you, it doesn't feel natural, but when you're doing it, it certainly feels natural. So
absolutely.
I've seen it both ways. But man, I really appreciate you coming on and going through all this. It's, we could probably talk for hours more. Maybe we'll have you come back and talk more, but people can find your stuff everywhere. But where's the best place to find your writing and find your social media?
Just Google Paul McCarney. I'll come up.
Yeah, actually, Google Paul McCarney hunting and just start reading.
I mean, that's right. Yeah. So, I mean, most of my stuff is up at the website's called landscapesandletters.com. I have a bunch of stuff I on the Hunt to Eat blog and on Truth About Fur blog as well. But that's kind of where I dump most of my ramblings and thoughts when no one else wants them at landscapesandletters.com. But no, this has been great, man. Thanks a lot for digging into this. I kind of keep saying to people, like, I sort of sit, we got to not only get out of our echo chambers, but break down the echo chambers. And I find, I do feel sometimes, I do worry sometimes that sitting and just writing things on a blog is I'm just sort of sitting in my own echo chamber. So it is super nice to actually discuss some of this stuff and think about it in real time and not be worried about the needing to be perfect and how you say things,
I tell my friends all the time that if you call me, you got to talk to me for an hour. Like, don't call me just to check in for like 5 minutes, because I'm a podcaster. If you tell me one thing, we're going to talk for a long time. But I've never written a
500-word blog post. It's just so I understand that for sure.
Yeah, we'll have you back on. I mean, when I was looking at like the categories of your writing on that website, Landscapes and Letters, a lot of it was like, wow, practical matters, personal reflections, management and policy, ethics and culture. A lot of the things that I think of as categories for this year program. So we'll have to have you back on and get into some of those other categories, but I really do.
Yeah, man, love to. That'd be great.
Yeah, I appreciate your thoughts on this and appreciate you having some time for us.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks so much for having me, Ben.
All right, Paul. Thanks, brother.
Talk soon.
That's it. That's all. Another episode in the books. Thank you to the wonderful Kayla Ray for making all of our dreams come true, mine specifically. And thank you to everybody that wrote in and helped us with this theme song. It is better, Phil, would you agree, than you could have ever imagined?
It actually is.
It really is. Yeah. I'm not even lying. Because we had not heard it before Kayla played it. And so you don't know. She could have half-assed it, which she didn't. But we didn't know. It was as organic as it gets. And when I heard it for the first time, I was like, that's catchy. I want to hear that every week. And sometimes things just work out the way they should. So we're all excited about that. We also want to thank Paul McCarney for coming in, breaking some stuff down with us. We went on some tangents, man, on that one, but it was fun. Smart dude, critical thinker. Important to have him in our community. So thank you to Paul for coming on and chatting with us. Next week, me and Phil are having quite an episode here. In both senses. An episode of the podcast and an episode where I can't get the words out of my mouth. So hopefully he edits out all the ridiculous mistakes that I've made on this episode. I think that Kayla Ray did such a good job that it just threw me for a loop mentally. And I can now no longer perform my duties as podcast host. Would you agree with that, Phil?
Yeah, she set such an example of professionalism and coherence that now you're buckling under the pressure.
And talent. That now I feel like I don't even know what I'm even doing here on this spinning blue orb in the middle of space. Anyway, it was good to get that out there, and we'll keep on keeping on. Next week, we're going to look at something important to us, Wisconsin. We do love you because you have Pat Durkin. You got Doug Duran over there. We love Wisconsin. We're going to talk about the recent wolf hunt over there. Wolves were killed I guess you could say, en masse over the last couple of weeks, and what is always going to be a controversial hunting, however brief, hunting season over there. So we're going to dive into that, going to look at it critically. Got a lot on the works all the way up until it's March, Phil, and all the way up until April when hunting season kicks off for turkeys, and we go full bore into Phil's first season as a hunter. Phil, actually, tags come out today in Montana. So we're going to get your turkey tags, and that'll be a ceremonial purchase for you. I'll even donate at least $1 to the effort.
Wow, thanks,
5.
Pat.
If not 5, 10, 15, any amount of money to get you out in the woods. So sorry that I sucked. Kayla Ray was good. Phil, the engineer, was good. And I'll be better next week, I promise. Say bye, Phil.
Goodbye.
Too long, 'cause I can't go a week without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong. Without doing wrong. Oh, without doing wrong. Drinking in heaven.
After 3 years of work, our follow-up to the Meat Eater Fish and Game Cookbook is here. It's the Meat Eater Outdoor Cookbook, wild game recipes for the grill, smoker, campfire, and camp stove. Here is your book for everything that's best cooked or eaten outside. From grilling to open fire cooking to Dutch ovens to smokers to barbecue to backpacking meals to how to pull off the perfect fish fry, with pit stops along the way for lessons about Ice Age cooking methods and the best 5 ways to construct a cooking fire you can be proud of. And of course, we're focusing on wild game and fish here with over 100 recipes, including stuffed venison burgers 3 ways, wild duck with ahi verde sauce, a jerky made with cola, a gin and tonic made with fire-charred lemons, and grilled frog legs made with a sticky sweet sauce. This ain't your normal cookbook, so be prepared to be surprised. Get your copy now. For more info, visit themeateater.com or buy it wherever books are sold.